This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first TAC meeting of 2023. Hopefully everybody has access to the agenda. You should have received it in an email from Maya. If you did not, you can access it from TBEP's webpage. And actually, we can probably throw the link up in the chat as well, just in case. My name is Aaron Brown. I'm one of the co-chairs of the TAC. Kelly's with us as well. You want to say hi, Kelly?
Good morning, everyone.
And we'll skip introductions for everyone else, but I did want to take a quick moment to introduce, I think at our last TAC meeting, we introduced our new restoration ecologist, Carrie Flaherty-Walia. And now we also have an environmental social scientist that we welcomed aboard. His name is Blake Simmons, and he's on the call today. So I just wanted to introduce two of our new staffers here at the Estuary Program.
Fantastic. Welcome aboard.
I did want to ask, not people who are speaking, because you're going to be introducing yourself when you speak, but do we have any new TAC visitors today? Folks have never attended a TAC meeting. It's your first time with the team. If we do, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and just saying hi, so that we can welcome you. We're continuing to try to build the TAC, and want to know who's engaging with us. So,
hi, this is Lindsay Painter. How are you?
Go ahead, Lindsay. I heard you first.
Yeah, I'm an environmental scientist. I work with Brown and Caldwell, and this came across my desk, and I thought this would be very interesting to attend. So I'm here.
Awesome. Well, welcome. I heard another voice. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Brett Urson here with EPC. This is my first time attending. I know a lot of these faces already, but yeah, let's like to attend and see what's going on.
Fantastic.
Great.
Any other new members today joining us? All right, hearing none, I'll pass the mic back over to Aaron to start off the first presentation. Thank you for entertaining me.
No, that was great. And that is one thing, there's definitely something to be said to meeting in person, but since we have been remote, our attendance and participation has greatly increased. So that's been wonderful to see everybody in for these gatherings. So before I introduce our first presenter, I would like to ask, as we are going, please make sure that you mute your microphone if you're not asking a question actively. It also never seems to hurt if we minimize the amount of camera feeds that are going on. It seems to help the bandwidth and the connectivity a little bit. Just remember, if you have a question, please turn those things back on so we can see and hear you. For the record. So our first presenter today is Mr. Oleg Martins. He is here to present there he is, talk about a proposal for microalgae mariculture, a pilot project here in Hillsborough Bay. So Oleg, you can take it away.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. I've met several of you over the last few months. Thanks all for giving me your time and hearing about this. This is my first time presenting to the TAC, so I'm not quite sure of procedure. Would you like me to share my screen with the presentation, or how does this go?
I gave you presenter controls. Did you pick them up?
I see that I have to select a tab to preview. Yep, I see it now. I'm figuring this out. Thanks for your patience. Except we're not going to start there. Sorry about that.
Of course.
All right. Can everybody see this first page of the presentation?
Yep, we see it perfectly.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So again, good morning, everyone. Thanks for your time today. I figured I'd start a little bit about myself. I'm a biologist and coastal environmental manager by training. Over the last 20 or so years, I've been working on a number of projects, but I started here in Tampa Bay region working at FMRI on green mussels, Asian green mussel invasive species, and the bay scallop restoration efforts with Dan Morelli and Bill Arnold. And then after that, I wandered into shrimp in the Gulf and the South Atlantic. And then I decided to go see what they were doing around the world and worked internationally for some time on various coastal and fisheries projects. I've been back in the Bay for about 7 or 8 years now. And my day-to-day job is running audits for the tuna industry and also doing certifications for the Whole Foods Shellfish Program. But what I'm presenting to you today, I'm doing as a private citizen. It's something I like to get started because I think there's a need and there's potential. And I'm excited to present this to you, and I welcome feedback at the end of this presentation. So why seaweed farming and why here in Hillsborough Bay? Well, like I said, that I've been in the Bay Area since '98. I came back about 7 or 8 years ago, and I live here in South Tampa, not too far from Bayshore. I'm out there most every day riding my bike. And I've noticed since I've been back just how the population has exploded in the region, how there's a lot of development, and how the issues that were already there 20 years ago are just here still and growing. I also think that some of these issues are politically tricky to manage. It's really difficult to go and tell people they can't have green lawns or that they need to fix their old septic tanks. It's really hard to go tell developers not to develop. And I know there's a number of rules and laws out there, but basically what I'm seeing is there's more stresses on the bay. And, you know, being out on Bayshore a lot, I noticed a lot of the seaweed that was growing along the wall. And then also when I go to Picnic Island and other places in the bay, I noticed that the seaweed is doing fairly well and seems to enjoy all that extra nutrient that's coming through, you know, the runoff during rain events or through the sewage that is not treated. And I was thinking, well, perhaps if we allowed the seaweed to grow in more areas than it currently is able to grow into, we could capture more of that nutrient load and reduce it and clean the water a little bit and reduce instances of red tide. So in a nutshell, this is a project where I'd like to test out various species of seaweed in a controlled growing fashion in areas where they don't naturally grow. This is essentially to demonstrate they can capture a number of the excess nutrients that are found in the water column, but also possibly some pollutants. Right now, the pilot project location that I'm looking at would be somewhere on the western side of Hillsborough Bay. Main reason for that, frankly, is because I've noticed there's some areas that are full of packed sand or mud, devoid of seagrass or other critical habitat, that are located between 4 and 6 feet in depth at high tide. And I'm thinking if we can put structures there that would allow the seaweed to grow on lines and not be too far from sunlight at the high tide line, they could do quite well there while not negatively impacting anywhere else, any of the other habitats. The other reason why there is because I could get there every day by bike. I wouldn't need to drive out there, and I could walk out to the site as opposed to needing a boat or any other type of equipment. And then the species I've been looking at are some of the native species to the Gulf of Mexico. You know, I've talked to some of you already about this. I've been to some meetings where I got some feedback, and I think any of these species would do well without causing a risk to the ecosystem. Apologies for the grainy picture, but this is one of the sites I'm considering right now. I'm not married to this site. I'm happy after I receive feedback to consider other locations. But the key characteristics, again, it has to be an area that's devoid of seagrass or any other critical habitat, that is located in an area where the seaweed can't really settle because there's too much depth, and so the seaweed wouldn't be able to survive during the high tides and because of the turbidity of the water, and an area that I could walk out to. Or paddleboard too, I'm okay with that too. As far as the design is concerned, this is the initial design that I'm thinking about. The reason for this design is really I want to keep it as simple as possible. It's also a design that I've seen in a number of places around the world, projects that I was overseeing over time in the Caribbean and East Africa and in Southeast Asia. It's easy to set up, easy to maintain, and it's frankly, it's cheap. You're using natural materials, so bamboo stakes at the ends, and then the lines. I like to personally do it with hemp ropes because they'll last long enough in the water. They're cheap to replace, and if there's any breakage and somehow we happen to lose them, they will stay in the environment less time than if I was using plastic or nylon ropes. So all the elements that would set up the farm structure would be made in such all the elements that we would pick for the farm structure would not be staying in the environment for extended periods of times if somehow they got lost. To minimize loss of equipment, one thing that will be done is that, again, I will be out there most every day so that I can tend to the structure. And if I see that there's any part of the structure that becomes weak, I would reinforce it or replace it so that even during storm events, we wouldn't have loss of farm equipment. So some of the considerations that I have so far and that I've heard from various stakeholders here in the area, again, should not negatively impact any critical habitats, seagrass being at the top of the list here, but any other critical habitats that would be identified, we wouldn't put the site there or near there. Endangered, threatened, and protected species and entanglements. I've had some feedback about the manatees, smalltooth, shark, and sturgeon, amongst others, but essentially designing the structure so that the manatees can swim under or between the lines without risk of them getting entangled. Frankly, I'm okay if the manatees come and eat all the seaweed on the farm. The point is to try to remove some elements from the system, but if the manatees find it as a natural food source, I'd rather them eat that than the lettuce they've been receiving in other parts of the state. Visual pollution is one of the considerations. I got some feedback about the fact that the property owners on Bayshore will not want something that can hamper their view, so we'll make sure that this is all below the waterline. Navigation, I gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago, U.S. Corps of Engineers. Some of you were on that presentation. Thank you for your time then, but this is another thing, making sure that we're not going to create a hazard for any of the boaters out there. From my just observations, there are very few to no boaters in those areas where I'm thinking of putting the farm. Simply because it gets too shallow and it's a hazard to navigation for them to go that far. The only folks that I see with motorized boats are those with flat bottom boats that are chasing the snook or some tourists on their jet skis. But we would make sure that we put buoys out there to let them know there's something under the waterline. Predation, we talked a little bit about that. That's factored into the project, and frankly, that's fine. Maintenance, just making sure we're out there, making sure that the farm is going to be maintained and that we minimize risk of breakage or loss of equipment. And then permitting, which I hadn't thought about initially, but which has proven to be quite interesting over the last year. The number of folks that will essentially need to review this and issue permits. And the reason permitting is partially an issue, by the way, is because this doesn't fall under FTACs. The submerged lands in the areas I'm considering fall under the stewardship of the Port of Tampa. And so as a result, I don't have the streamlining that FTACs would usually provide for aquaculture operations in other lease sites that have been previously approved. As far as the potential benefits, again, the goal is really to try to remove some of the excess nutrients in the water column. Hopefully we can remove some pollutants as well. I have found a lab here in town in Tampa that can do all the analysis and that can give me at the very least, the heavy metals. Per my experience with similar projects elsewhere around the world, this is going to create a de facto marine protected area and additional habitat and nursery for some of the local wildlife. I'm hopeful that even if we just remove 1% or 2% of the excess nutrient in the water, the algae will act as a filter and will start cleaning up the water column. I'm hopeful that the presence of the algae is going to help the bay's ecosystem mitigate against anthropogenic stresses. I'm thinking there's a potential here for educating the public at large, but primarily the policymakers about the benefits of algae farming in Tampa Bay, and specifically algae farming for environmental services, not algae farming for commercial purposes. And then finally, I mentioned fertilizers at the beginning of the presentation and finish off with it here. The reason I'm thinking about this is because I'd like this project to be self-sustainable financially. And so I've talked to a few folks who own farms who are willing to test this out. Composting seaweed is not new. It's been done all over the world, especially in Europe and the West Coast and the East Coast here in the Northeast and Northwest. I'm just thinking it makes good sense over here, especially for our impoverished soils. And then once proof of concept is done with tropical algae being used as fertilizer, and there are some projects ongoing with that in the Caribbean as well, notably in Belize with sargassum. But once we have proof of concept here, this could generate sufficient revenue to help maintain the farm and potentially replicate this farm elsewhere if everybody agrees this is a good idea and it can help the bay cope with the anthropogenic stresses. Sorry. And this is it. I want to make this quick and leave plenty of time for questions. So thank you for your attention.
Great, Oleg. Thank you very much. We can open the floor up. Does anybody have any questions, comments to start off with? Don't forget you had to unmute your mics.
You can also enter things in the chat.
Good point.
Hey guys, I guess I'm raising my hand, but I probably just should speak up, so I will do that.
Yeah, I can't see the hand raises on the desktop.
That's okay. Yeah, no, it's all good. Yeah, great presentation, Oleg. I appreciate all that information. And you're right. You know, this is not a new concept. This is being done all over the world, and I think there's some success to it. I have a couple of questions though, relative to some of the goals that you had mentioned about excess nutrient removal. Hillsborough Bay is about 25,000 acres. That's the surface area of the bay. And you were, I think if I heard right, you were saying that you're proposing to do like a tennis court size, which is like, 0.05 acres, about 2,100
Yeah.
square feet. So I guess my concern or my question is, with respect to scaling this up to something that could actually be measurable in a bay segment like Hillsborough Bay, the expectation, I think, in my mind, and because I've seen work like this done before, where there are small pilot projects, would be that you're not going to see any real difference in the bay itself, but that doesn't mean that it's not a good idea. So my question is, what sort of, or have you thought about how you would monitor and assess nutrient removal? I'm assuming that you have some information on what the nitrogen and phosphorus uptake rates are for these particular species of algae. I know there's there's not a lot, but there's some literature on nutrient removal efficiencies of these macroalgae. But how have you thought about, like, how would you go about testing the proof of concept, so to speak?
Certainly, and good questions. So a number of things here. I got a chance to talk to Sheila a while ago. It was sometime mid last year, and she sent me on some sources to follow up on the literature side, and I've been collecting as much as I could. Surprisingly, even though there's a lot of work on seaweed done, the work on nutrient uptake of seaweed here in the Gulf of Mexico is not as extensive as one would think. And so
Yeah, you're right.
the first step would have been to identify I gave species family names in the presentation. We'll need to get down to this very specific species that are growing here along the seawall. Visually, I've identified them as those groups that I provided in the presentation, but it would be to take those basically wild or native populations and bring them to the lab and set a baseline. Here, mature seaweed, here's how much we have of each of the nutrients and each of the pollutants and how much carbon each of them has in the samples that I bring to the lab. Thereafter, you take those species, you set them on the line, each of them in a growing line, and you control how long it takes them to grow to mature size, and then you harvest them. You take a sample again at harvest, and you bring it back to the lab, and you see, does that match the baseline that I had along the seawall? Does it change? Basically, we'll collect all that data, and also what's the volume of that seaweed we can expect from a growing line over a defined period of time. At the end of the project, which will last 12 months with a 9-month growing period, currently that's how I have it in the project proposal, we would extrapolate the data, either to say this is the potential to the bay, or to say this is what we got in this very specific spot of Hillsborough Bay. Do you think the results are interesting enough that it's worth doing it in the channel on the east side of Davis Island where the boats are coming out, and to have a slightly different structure, but lines of seaweed that are basically diagonal to where the boats are passing, that would capture whatever's coming down from Hillsborough River, and that would capture what's coming down from the harbor itself. Can we do it around Picnic Island, for example? Do we have similar results? Thereafter, can we do this at scale that it would make a difference for Tampa Bay? I'd love to answer all those questions basically over time. The only reason I'm keeping the pilot project to a tennis-sized court right now is because initially I thought I was going to do an acre and about 320 growing lines, but the feedback I'm receiving is try to keep it smaller so that the local residents don't throw a fit by having a massive structure in Hillsborough Bay that impedes their view. So I'm thinking if I can have at least between 5 and 10 growing lines, that would be sufficient to collect the amount of data that we need to get started. And the other thing about keeping it small, I can keep the costs low. And since I'm going to be doing all the work and financing a big portion of this, there's more likelihood of success that way, as opposed to something that would depend on a massive external source of funding or me hiring people to get this done.
I think you're going to have better success in some of those more confined areas, like you were mentioning, like maybe up around Davis Island, because and we've done similar work like this in Homosassa, not with macroalgae but with wetland plants. So we've constructed floating wetlands in an attempt to try to mitigate some of the nutrient load that's coming in. There was basically the poop from the giant river hippo. Mo, I think, I can't remember his name, but he lives in Homosassa. He's apparently officially a resident of the city of Homosassa, oldest living river hippo in the world. But he poops a lot, and so there's like a kind of a catchment for it, and so we built this wetland right downstream of that to try to catch some of that effluent, and there's birds and stuff too. So in an application like that, I think that's where you're going to have the best success. But when you look at a large open water feature like Hillsborough Bay, I'm just not sure you're not going to see a difference. Plus, there's a lot of macroalgae, as we all know, that's already out there, and so your farm is competing with macroalgae that's growing presumably where the nutrient availability is, which may not be where your site is located. So just some things to think about. But yeah, a lot of good ideas.
Appreciate that, and if I can take just a minute to respond to this. Agreed. I mean, the seaweed that I'm seeing right now is mostly around the sewage outflow pipes that are along Bayshore. Because with a group, we go walking out there and we try to pick up a lot of the trash that's in the water along the seawall. And after Gasparilla, we go pick up the beads. And I've noticed they do congregate around those sewage outflows. The areas that I think are really interesting are those areas where the seaweed can't grow because it's too deep and they don't get enough sunlight. So that's one. And as far as the other areas that have macroalgae that might compete, absolutely. Although there, it's a different angle I'm taking. I've heard from wreck fishermen and captains that there's too much seaweed in parts of the bay. Actually, that was at the meeting where I met some of you at on Snell Isle and St. Pete. It was Ocean Conservancy meeting, and they were saying, look, there's just fouling of some, I think it was caulerpa that they have too much of. And if we can demonstrate for this project that it can be converted nicely into fertilizer, well, maybe we can start harvesting some of that and give seagrass a chance to recover in those areas that are invaded by caulerpa. I honestly think it hasn't been, well, this is my naive perspective. I don't think it's been looked into as much here in the US because there's no money to be made from this, right? It's purely environmental service. And even if you make fertilizer, it's dirt cheap. It's not like this is gonna all of a sudden gonna overcome phosphate or any of the other chemical fertilizers. But I think if we can demonstrate that some monies can be made out of this and that it does provide some environmental services, then we have more of a case, and then we could get the authorizations to go and harvest that caulerpa that's fouling those other areas on top of having the farms.
So I think we have two hands that are raised, Kim Yates and Dave Tomasco.
Hi, this is Kim. Just wondering, have you discussed perhaps co-locating your site with one of the EPC long-term water quality monitoring sites to get at least monthly numbers? And, I understand it's difficult to sort of pin this down to this particular site with a fairly small study site, but that's a possibility. And then along with that, there's real potential to monitor for carbonate chemistry as well for potential mitigation benefits for coastal acidification. And I see Dave has his hand up. Dave Tomasco and Ryan Moyer and I actually did some studies on seagrass beds, and we were very much able to see localized effects on the water chemistry, particularly the carbon chemistry with respect to coastal acidification and pH. So I suspect with even that small site, you would see localized effects. And as part of that, if you can coordinate some monitoring or water quality data collection during slack tides or incoming and outgoing tides, it's a little bit easier to see some of those localized effects as well. Dave, jump in at any time because I saw your thumbs up some of that discussion. So jump in and add to that, please.
Yeah, well, so mine was like, so Oleg, I like the concept of it, but I think actually I disagree with some of the comments made earlier. First off, there's not multiple sewage outfalls. There's like stormwater outfalls, but there's only one sewage outfall, and that's out in the water. So you're seeing stormwater runoff, not sewage.
It smells an awful lot like sewage to me, so I don't know what's happening there.
It may smell like it, but it's not.
Okay.
But I think,
like,
more importantly, there's a lot of literature on nutrient uptake with macroalgae. I got my PhD with Clinton Dawes and Brian LaPointe and John Ryther and Dennis Hanasak have done a lot of work. And I think that's what I would strongly suggest is like, there already are estimates about nutrient stripping capacities of macroalgae, and that might be something to like compare on a dollar per pound basis to Water Management District guidance for cooperative funding. So, for example, we've actually come up with how much dollar per pound the efficiency of removing dead fish after a red tide. We've done the same thing on aquatic harvesting of weeds in lakes in Collier County, and I think you could probably do a pretty good job because there is a lot of work actually on nutrient stripping of macroalgae in Florida, and I think certainly a lot in New England as well. And I think you could probably build on it and have a pretty, in a fairly short period of time, you could probably build up an argument for the value of this, because we build stormwater ponds all the time in urban settings that cost millions of dollars that might remove 5-10 pounds of nitrogen. Yeah. And so dollar per pound comparison about what we do with stormwater ponds could make this a better argument.
I appreciate that argument and the previous comments as well. Allow me to start with you, and then I'll go back to the previous comment about doing water monitoring. So I did, in my research, find quite a bit out in the Gulf of Mexico and off of Louisiana with UCSB and University of Alabama and a number of others. I did find quite a bit out in the Northwest and the Northeast, and then as far as Australia and all around the world. I'm not finding as much in Florida. I did reach out to Dr. Hanasak, who was quite responsive back in October initially, and then I haven't been able to get back in touch with him. And I hope he's okay, but I did want his feedback on this since he's been active in doing this in the Indian River Lagoon for so long.
And probably the better point of contact would be Brian Lapointe. He's actually done more specific work on this than anyone I know of.
Is he also with Harbor Branch, or?
He's with FAU Harbor Branch, yeah.
Okay.
Dave,
I
can you
will-
drop his email in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Thank you for the suggestion. And to the previous comment, I just want to let you know that I have been in touch with EPC. Mr. Michael Guile over there is reviewing the project. He provided some feedback this morning, and he has passed it on to his water team for additional feedback. I'm all ears if we can coordinate some water quality testing with this project, either at their sites or at the site we would ultimately pick if I succeed in getting all the permitting to go ahead with this.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Oleg.
This is Chris with EPC. Michael Guile actually sent that over yesterday for us review. I just did want to say that we do have 2 stations. I put it in the chat too. We do have 2 stations in that area. One's up Ballast Point, the other one's further south. But like Ed said, our stations are probably in a little bit deeper water, approximately 3 meters. So we're not, up on the flats like where you're talking about up there. But you can still use that data. I mean, it's publicly available to everyone.
Thank you. While I have everybody on the call, if I may ask a question, one of the some of the feedback I got when I presented to Corps of Engineers is they wanted to make sure that there had been a recent survey. It wasn't actually Corps of Engineers. I think it was Dr. Smarik who asked if there was a recent survey for the critical habitats in the region. And I've been on the Tampa Bay Estuary Program website, and perhaps I'm a very bad researcher. I'm having trouble finding a GIS map of sorts that would show me the substrate in the area and when the latest survey was taken. I have older maps. I just don't have anything recent, and I'm not sure if anybody knows whether something has been done in the last 5 years, for example.
Well, Oleg, we're about to release, and I'm actually going to be giving a talk later on today about our preliminary or provisional results, but we are going to release the 2022 seagrass maps,
Okay.
which does include Hillsborough Bay. So that might give you a good baseline anyway as to what we've mapped in the areas where we would expect to see seagrass. And our maps go back to 1988, so you can kind of see areas that maybe were colonized by grass beds in the past and we don't have them now, or areas where there's never been grass, and that might help you out. That might answer their question too as far as that information. So yeah, you can get with me, and I'll make sure to give you whatever you need. Yeah, and we've also got the imagery for that area too, so you can see the imagery and the map as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's just not released yet. So wait 3 more weeks, about 2 or 3 more weeks.
Based on all the permits I recently learned I would need to get, I'm not going to get started in 3 weeks. So no hurry.
Okay. Hey, while I'm on, I just have one, just not really a question, just a comment to throw out to the group, because I think, one of the things I see a great value in this is really understanding, and I think we need to think about how we're going to assess nutrient uptake for these algae, because I think we have a really good opportunity to understand and quantify some of those nutrient pathways. One of the things, Oleg, that this group has been talking extensively about is really understanding these alternative nutrient pathways. So, nutrients come into the bay. They are sometimes they are assimilated by phytoplankton in the water column, expressed as chlorophyll. But what we're seeing is in many parts of the bay, including Hillsborough Bay, that pathway actually prefers macroalgae. And if the nutrients are stripped from the water column and are assimilated by macroalgae, if all you're doing is collecting water quality samples, you can misinterpret the status of your estuary as being healthy, meeting the numeric nutrient criteria, and it'll mask a potential issue, which is what we're seeing expressed as macroalgae. So I think, collecting water quality samples, understanding, the wet weight, dry weight, the nutrient content in these algae, I think could really help us better understand and quantify that nutrient pathway that appears to be more the preferential pathway in places like Hillsborough Bay and maybe even Old Tampa Bay.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. We wouldn't want to get in a situation where anybody feels that the nutrients have gone down so much that the seagrass doesn't have enough. That's not the ultimate goal of this. And actually, if we see that if we see that the seagrass is coming back and edges closer to the seaweed farm, I've seen plenty of places where it can grow under, but we could also remove the structure quite easily. These structures are made so that they're not permanent, right? They can be removed quite easily. Same thing if we feel that there's a really strong hurricane coming for us. We could go and remove everything before the hurricane so that it doesn't end up being trash strewn across the bay afterwards and causing entanglement issues for the animals or just trash, frankly.
Cool.
Well, I don't know if we have time for any other questions, but Oleg, thank you very much. I'm assuming that you're still open to questions and comments via email, should anyone want to reach out to you. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
So,
thank you very much. And if it's okay, I'd like to stay on just a little longer to look at the comments in the chat room because I'm just noticing them now and I need to note down the email addresses. And then after that, I'll excuse myself. I'm in the middle of audit period and I've got 32 reports waiting for me.
Oleg, I saved the chat and all of the emails and post them to the meeting folder, and I can share that with you too if you don't want to try and record all of this stuff. It'll be shared.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for your time and the feedback.
We appreciate your concern for Tampa Bay, and if we can be a resource, to you and your sure.
I love Tampa Bay, and our kids are just now, the first one's just reading middle school, so we're not going anywhere, and I'd like to do a little bit for the Bay and for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so it was a wonderful presentation to get us started today. Our next presenter is Emily Hall, who's coming to speak to us on the socioeconomic and environmental vulnerabilities to coastal acidification. Morning, Emily.
Hi, and actually Dr. Janet Raymer is going to be the one presenting today. There's kind of a team of us working together. Janet's going to give a talk and introduce what we're talking about, and then Jen Vreeland is going to control the slides for us. So I'll just be in the background.
The old bait and switch. No, all right. That sounds wonderful. Great. Do you have control?
Jen should have control.
Okay,
she's gonna
fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi there, everybody. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we sure can.
Great, great.
Well, thank you for having us today. I'm going to introduce a project that the Southeast Ocean and Coastal Acidification Network and the Gulf of Mexico Coastal Acidification Network have been working on for the past 6 months. We were funded by NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program, and if you're not familiar with our projects, we are our fiscal homes are under the regional IUCE associations of Socorro in the Southeast and GCOOS in the Gulf region. So actually, this project is also advised by the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership through participation with Jennifer Hecker. This project is basically an information gathering project from you, our stakeholders. So the primary missions of SOCAN and GCAN are to study the effects of acidification around our regions. There are 5 other CANs across the United States, and we all kind of participate together to establish stakeholder connection and advance education and outreach for acidification across the country. Jen, next slide, please. So this morning, I'm going to give you a very brief background on what acidification is and why we should all care about it. And then we're going to go into our project, which is our questionnaire, which Jen will also be controlling. If you've never used Mentimeter before, don't worry, we're going to walk you through it. But if you can just have a smart device, either a cell phone or a tablet or your laptop ready, we're going to give you a link after we go through what acidification is, and we'll all get onto the Menti together. So acidification is essentially a coastal ocean water quality issue. As we saw in our last presentation this morning, there's a lot of excess nutrients, which we refer to as eutrophication, that occurs especially around urbanized estuaries like Tampa Bay. These nutrient sources come in through septic runoff, other point sources, upriver, riverine inputs throughout the watershed, erosion, agricultural runoff. Runoff can be enhanced by the impervious surfaces that are around any coastal body of water. So essentially what happens with acidification is there's an excess of carbon dioxide that comes from any one of these sources, including the atmosphere. Once that carbon dioxide dissolves into the surface waters, there's a series of natural chemical reactions that occur. But when those chemical reactions are off balance because of excess CO2, there's excess formation of acid in the water, which decreases the pH. So those low pH conditions can be harmful to biota in coastal waters, but not only to biota, but to other calcium carbonate structures such as reefs, shells, anything. So we're concerned about the vulnerabilities that we face in the coming decades as acidification increases. Acidification can impact fisheries, natural habitat, and ecosystems, but also the services that ecosystems provide, not just through a cultural perspective, but those natural regulating services such as CO2 uptake and the natural habitat that provides nurseries to young fish in estuaries. At the moment, we don't really know the spatial extent or how quickly waters are acidifying across the Gulf of Mexico and the southeast regions. So what we're doing today is coming to you to help us understand where we need to be monitoring, where we need to improve our communication with stakeholders, and where we should be focusing educational opportunities. So with that in mind, you do not need any prior knowledge of acidification or the chemical reactions that go into it. We're going to walk you through the following Menti questionnaire. Jen, if you could go to the next slide, please. I don't know if it's just me, but mine's a little slow. Okay. So first I'll say, if anybody has any specific questions related to the information that I just gave you, please go ahead and raise your hand or just ask them now. While we're doing that, on your smart devices or your laptop or your desktop computer, if you could go to www.menti.com, or you can scan the QR code that's on the screen. And once you get to the Menti homepage, you can enter the bold number that's on your screen, or I'm going to read it, which is 666-34784. And that's going to bring you up to our questionnaire. So Jen, if you could switch over to Menti, that would be great. We have about 21 or 22 slides that we're going to go through with questions on them. And I will just say that this group is the largest group that we have presented to so far. And with everybody participating, it would push our sample size for our questionnaire up over 100. So we're really excited to be here today and to be able to go through this with you. I'll also just give you a little bit of information while everyone is getting on to Menti, that This project, by the end of it, we are going to compile all this information, and it is going to go to directly inform a report to Congress and to the White House on our monitoring prioritization needs for acidification across the United States, which is a second report to the vulnerability study. Part of vulnerability includes the social aspect, which is why we're doing this with stakeholders, not just research scientists. So if we could go to the first question, please, Jen. So by now you should have this up on your phone, and if you could please go ahead and answer the question, do you have any knowledge on this topic prior to today? If so, how would you classify your level of knowledge on ocean acidification? So we're going to give about 45 seconds to a minute per slide to get as many responses as we can. Unfortunately, once we go on to the next one, we won't be able to accept responses on each slide or on that slide anymore. So if you could be as efficient as possible, that would be great. And we are watching the numbers go up in the bottom corner of the slide. We're now up to 46 responses. Well, I'm really glad to see that everybody had some amount of knowledge of acidification prior to today.
10 seconds, Janet.
Awesome. So Emily's going to chime in and give us our little 10-second warning for each slide. So I think we're about there. If you could go on to the next question, please, Jen. And anybody can feel free to chime in at any time with any specific question about the slide or about any of the information that we're giving you today. How would you describe your main source of information about acidification? Have you learned it in school, on social media, print media, a public institution such as an aquarium, nature preserve, museum, etc., or another source? And if you're feeling especially technically savvy and you want to give us that other source, you can put it into the chat.
Jan, are you including peer-reviewed journals under the print media?
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you.
I think a lot of us are putting that as other.
10 seconds.
All right, let's get those last responses. And we can go to the next slide, please. Which of the following processes are you familiar with? Please check all the processes that you are familiar with. And these are the processes that we are aware of that contribute to acidification in coastal bodies of water. And if you're not familiar with any of them, you can select other.
Ten seconds.
All right, let's go on to the next. Which of these processes do you think could lead to or worsen acidification? So these are the same processes from the other slide. This time we want to know what your impression of them is.
Let's give a little more time on this one.
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably good.
Okay. All right, if we could go to the next, please. Are you concerned about the effect of acidification that it will have on the environment?
We're good. Next slide. Yeah.
Okay. If you are concerned about the effects of acidification on the environment, please rank the ecosystems of concern to you. Obviously, there are many other ecosystems, but these are the dominant ecosystem types throughout the Southeast and the Gulf of Mexico region.
Okay, that's a minute.
Right. Oh, just got another 2. All right, we can go on to the next. Thank you. Are you aware of the potential effects of coastal and ocean acidification on marine animals?
Okay.
Okay. On to the next, please. Of the marine animals that may be affected by acidification, which are you most concerned about? Oysters, clam, lobster, mussel, shrimp, finfish, corals, or none of these?
Ten seconds.
All right. Well, looks like we have 43 responses. Oh, 44. Just about where we've been. If you could go on to the next, please. Do you personally fish for finfish or shellfish? This is a very general question. You can be a recreational fisherman, or you could be a commercial or subsistence. This includes just, do you fish or dig? Great. I think we can go on to the next. This is where we want to know, if you fish, please specify if you fish recreationally or commercially. We're going to include subsistence fishing in the recreational fishing category here. All right, I think we probably have all of our yes responses from the previous slide captured in this one. If we could go on to the next, please. Again, if you responded yes, please specify which zone best describes your fishing grounds. Are you offshore? Do you fish in nearshore coastal waters, inshore in bays and estuaries, inshore in tidal flats or marshes, or a different type of environment? I think we're just missing one response, one previous yes. There we go, we got it. Okay, if we could go on to the next slide, please. Don't worry about all of you who said, no, you don't fish. We're going to bring you right back in just a second. If these ecosystems are affected by acidification, which in your opinion is the most important to focus on? So even if you don't fish and you answered no to do you fish, you can jump back in here and please tell us which do you think is which environment is most important to focus on? Great, it looks like we've got our no responses chiming back in.
Okay.
All righty. Why don't we go on to the next, please? What best describes the top 3 types of seafood you fish or consume at home? So this is a word cloud. So please go ahead and type in your answer. And as the answers come in, we'll see them pop up on the screen. So this can be shellfish, it could be finfish, or it could be algae, seaweed. I would have to put the none as well. Unfortunately, I can't eat shellfish or finfish, only freshwater.
Okay, that's a minute.
All right. If we could go on to the next, please. What recreational marine activities do you take part in? Scuba diving, snorkeling, sailing or boating, fishing, shellfish digging, going to the beach, kayaking, paddle boarding, or do you not partake in any marine activities?
No surfing?
Let's include that in, I would say going to the beach, because you have to go to some beach to get into surf. But we can amend that a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have full response.
Great, let's go on to the next, please. We are coming to the end of this, so thank you all for hanging in there and participating. Are you concerned that acidification might affect your employment in the future?
Does this have to be a positive or negative, or just in general?
It's it's a really good question.
I think we, in general.
Yeah.
Okay, because being in the environmental field, unfortunately, when things go wrong, that we're more, sought after. So
That is true. We wouldn't have funding right now if we didn't have acidification.
Okay, that's time.
Great. Let's go on to the next. The following locations could be affected by acidification. Would you please rank your concern about the potential effects of acidification in the following ecosystems? Shallow coral reef ecosystems, estuaries, mangrove ecosystems, deep coral reef ecosystems, open bays and waters, and mangrove ecosystems. And I will just let you know right here that if you were not able to participate in the Menti version today during this presentation, I will be putting into the chat the Google Forms link for the same questions. So, but if you are participating in the Menti, we ask that you please not participate in the Google form.
That's a minute, but let's give a few more seconds.
Yeah, they seem to be trickling in. And the Google form version you can take at any time. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes. All right, why don't we go on to the next one, please? Now we want to understand where you think our research priorities should be. So if you could please rank from 1st to 9th, the different research areas. So we have impacts to habitat, ways to reduce acidification impacts, where acidification is occurring, the rates of acidification, impacts to economies, which includes recreational and commercial, impacts from extreme events, which would include droughts, hurricanes, floods, etc., technology development, and impacts to the aquaculture industry. If there are other environmental impacts that we should be studying, then we're happy to take any comments on that in the chat.
Ten seconds.
Okay. All right, why don't we head on to the next one? Are there any research priorities that we did not mention? You can go ahead and type those here. I didn't see any come up in the chat. So if we don't get any in the next few seconds, we can move on. Food web impacts, that's a really good one. All right, Jen, why don't we, oh, wait, buffering capacity of ecosystems and estuaries. All right, great. And oh, there's another one. Well, fortunately, Kim Yates is on this project as well, and she does study chemical erosion of carbonate sediments, and we're really excited that that came up here, because most people don't think about that.
Okay.
All right, let's go on to the next. And we would love it if you could rank the following educational opportunities that we should target for acidification. Should we be targeting, I guess this is mostly like, which do you think is the most important because it's ranking? Should we be targeting policymakers, public interest groups or campaigns, colleges and universities, K through 12 curriculum, tribal engagement, or underrepresented groups? And I will just say that we do plan to target all of them, but where should we start? And I do believe the next one is our last one. Are there any educational opportunities you think we've missed? Actually, I think we have one more after this one.
10 seconds.
All right, I think we can head on to the last one. What types of communication would be helpful for conveying information about acidification? So this is another word cloud. Please feel free to type in any types of communication that you feel would be helpful that we can start to target. Oh man, looks like SoCan's gonna have to get a TikTok account.
I really enjoy the stickers on the gas pumps too.
Oh,
I definitely read those every time I'm putting gas in my car.
my husband and I started collecting them where we would take them off the gas tank, and now we have a whole collection of gas station stickers, political gas station stickers.
That's great.
These are some really great. Oh, I like the NPR suggestion as well. I'm a big NPR listener myself.
But yeah, that's time.
Okay. I think we have just one more informational slide for everyone after this one. If you could go to the last one, Jen. So what I've done on here is I've put the websites for SOCAN and GCAN. We are socan.socorro.org and gcoos.org/GCAN. And I'm going to put one more website in the chat, which is the project homepage. You can please feel free to check out more information about the project. I know that the executive summaries of the National Vulnerability Report were sent out to this group before the meeting. We encourage you to read those, and you can sign up for SOCAN monthly emails for information about acidification projects and goings on around the Southeast. And I know that GCOOS also has a monthly email or quarterly email that goes out, and there's information about GCAN in there as well. If there are any more questions, I can take them really quickly. I know that we've probably hit our time, and we thank you for your patience and everyone participating in the Menti today.
Is this a free platform, the Mentimeter?
I believe so.
Oh, okay. It was very useful. I just wanted to know about that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Janet or Emily today?
Dave, is your hand still up? Yeah, sir.
Oh, yes, hello. How y'all doing? Good morning. Just wanted to address a great presentation. Especially appreciate the interactive nature of the presentation in terms of getting, hopefully you get all the data you need in order to do some interesting insights. In terms of just want also to address the question about the Mentimeter, whether it's free. There is a free version, of course, but if you want to get all the bells and whistles, you probably need to spend. I believe that our agency just got like a license. Again, not sure what the cost of that is. I'm not the qualitative analyst here, but thank you again.
Thank you again for having us. Please feel free to share the Google form that's in the chat. We would love to get as many responses as possible. So thank you again for having us, and check our project website. Over the next year, we'll have the final results, and we'll probably be back to speak to you then.
Great. We look forward to it. All right. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Quentin Tuckett from UF to discuss seagrass propeller scar hotspot mapping in Tampa Bay. Are you there, Quentin?
He's on the call, and I just turned presenter controls over. There he is.
All right.
I'm definitely here.
All right. Fantastic.
Do you want the presenter controls, or do you want Josh or somebody else on the team to have them?
I can do it.
Okay.
Is that working?
We see your presenter view, not the show itself.
Okay. How do I go about doing that?
Quentin, do you have multiple monitors?
I do. Is that a problem?
Try changing your monitor. Yeah, when you open the PowerPoint. And
Let's try this again. Did that work? Nope. Josh, do you have it? Can you just pull it up and I'll just tell you to advance?
I think I can give it a shot. Do I have
I just
screen sharing ability?
I just handed you presenter controls, Josh.
Okay, cool. Let's see what happens here.
We
How
got
is
it.
that?
Yep.
Is that zoomed out? That's okay. All right. All right. I'm just here for moral support and to take notes during the discussion time and maybe jump in. So I'm going to let Quentin just tell me when you want me to click, Quentin. Where'd Quentin go?
Quentin, you're self-muted, it shows as. There you go.
There we go. So on behalf of myself and Josh, obviously is here. I think there's some other collaborators on the call. I saw Angela Collins, Sheila as well. Caitlin Lawson, she's with Auburn University. She did a lot of the hotspot analysis, a landscape ecologist there. She might be on a little later. She had another meeting today, but she might be on. So hopefully she does show up, because a lot of the technical aspects of the hotspot analysis, those questions are better directed to her. Okay, go ahead and advance. So as part of the project, we kind of separated this into 3 principal tasks, and with the overall goal of well, trying to reduce seagrass prop scars, or at least make people knowledgeable about those prop scars.
Sorry,
Did we
Quentin. I'm just
lose?
going to fix this so it's full view for everybody.
Okay. And there's actually been a number of studies somewhat related to this, not the full scope that we're doing here. There was one further north in the Gulf. Josh Patterson was on that. There's also a current project, may have been wrapped up pretty soon in the Keys. So there is interest in this prop scar analysis and trying to change practices. But of course, that can be difficult. And oftentimes, if you just get a change in knowledge or even attitudes, you're probably successful. So task one is to do an image analysis at Tampa Bay. So first, where are the prop scars? We need to know where they are before we target our outreach activities. And the outreach activities are task two. Task three is outreach effectiveness monitoring. So are people seeing our materials? One. Two, are they actually responding or engaging with those materials? And we're doing that with a pre and a post survey. Click. The preliminary survey was designed to determine knowledge, attitudes, and practices. So a CAP style study. These CAP studies are, they're great for doing marketing or social behavioral change. Of course, once again, the first two, knowledge and attitudes, those can be readily evaluated, but the practices are much more difficult because you're often relying on self-reported behaviors. And we probably all think we're saints when we're probably sinners. We use Qualtrics, and the survey was sent out to 40,000 registered anglers. And this was done because there's a readily available email list for anglers, and anglers use the bay heavily. And anglers were in Manatee County, Hillsborough, and Pinellas County. So anglers in that area. We received 1,449 completed surveys. So this is a large number of surveys. So on the back end, if we can get anything close to that, we should be able to detect some differences if they're there. So if you look at a traditional survey, they're on the order of hundreds. And so this is a good a sample to work with. Of course, the response rate was not very high. This is not surprising for an unsolicited email survey. And I don't want to share too much about some of the comments we received back from some folks after being emailed, but some of the responses were just 2 words, and it began with F and ended with U. So some people hate these emails. And go ahead and advance, click. So I'm just going to walk through a few of the questions that we had. We have many, many more, but just a few, just to get the flavor of what we've done with this survey. The first one is just the number of years boating in Tampa Bay. Less than 1 year, 1 to 5 years, 6 to 10, 11 plus years. So what you see here is that by and large, anglers in Tampa Bay are at least self-reporting that they've spent a lot of time in the bay. And this is actually a nice result. That's, experience should breed more knowledge of the bay, where seagrass beds are, things of that nature. Click. The next question was, what do you do when you come across the seagrass beds? Proceed as usual. Very few said that, but actually there were a few that said that they would just proceed as usual. And I think we've seen these people out in the bay. It doesn't matter where they're going. They're going all out, full throttle. And, you know, in some cases that can actually work because once you go off plane, you're actually going to start hitting the substrate. Slow down, another one, turn off the prop, not as popular. Trim up, obviously, one of the most popular responses, and stay in marked channels. Click. Next question was, what do you best associate seagrass with? Economy didn't rank up very high. Habitats was the highest, and we assume this is just related to habitat for fish. A lot of anglers in the bay will target seagrass beds for a variety of sport fish as a food source. And I think we're trying to tease out that maybe that's a food source for wildlife, manatees, and also the base of a food chain. Seabed stabilizer, and then a nursery area for juvenile crabs or fish. Click. Next question was, where do you receive your information from on safe boating techniques, podcasts, newspapers, somewhat low, online websites, social media, somewhat lower, and then in-person classes. I don't know what those in-person classes are, but I do know that Freedom Boat Club, which is popular in this area, they do have a training that people go through, and this is actually something that we're working with them on to maybe revise some of those practices. So it was actually good to see that that does happen. Click. Next question is, which of the following would be most helpful to prevent seagrass scarring? The most selected response was buoy markers to indicate seagrass beds. This was a bit surprising to me because a lot of people you talk to, they really don't like buoys, it seems. So the fact that that was selected was a bit of a surprise. Physical map of seagrass beds in Tampa Bay, a QR code that would link to a map of seagrass beds. And then the second highest was actually signage at boat ramps. So this is actually a part of our outreach activities. So it's good to see that that was something that was valued. And then lastly was other resources. Click. Survey take home. This is just a very quick look at the data. There are dozens more complex questions. This is just something that Qualtrics can spit out in a hurry. Eventually, that data needs to be put into context of how many surveys and ultimately compared to the post. So in the absence of the post, what it's just saying is what anglers think about seagrass. And we're actually trying to get additional surveys because anglers are not completely representative of what is going on in the bay. One of those groups that we hope to have surveys from is members of Freedom Boat Club. We have a newsletter item going out pretty soon that will have a link to this Qualtrics survey. So we are attempting to get a broader audience for this survey. Click. The next part of the study was the hotspot analysis. So where are these propeller scars in terms of their density? This is necessary if you're going to target particular areas for outreach. Click. So to do this, actually, let me take a step back. So typically, how this would be done and how it's been done in Florida is kind of a manual process. So seagrass scars are traced, or even more of a qualitative or semi-quantitative approach where regions of high scarring are kind of circled. So on kind of a regional or region-specific basis. But here we attempted to identify all prop scars in Tampa Bay and then create a much larger map. So we did this by first creating a training data set, and we manually traced 250 seagrass scars across the SwiftMud images for Tampa Bay. It looks like there's a presentation perhaps after this on some of the updates, so that'll be interesting. So trace first, and then
Quentin, I think we lost you. Are you there?
yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear
Oh,
me with the?
I can hear you.
Okay, so I'm going to keep going. Thought I got this worked out with IT today. They said I had to go to the lowest resolution for my camera because of some issues we're having here at the lab. We're going to broadband tomorrow, so too bad it couldn't have happened earlier. So the next step after we trace those scars across all different types of habitats within those seagrass polygons that are previously identified. But they were done in different areas to get different substrates and populate that seagrass scar training set with a variety of areas. And then eventually we ran it through the MASK RCNN model in ArcGIS. And this is a machine learning process to eventually identify all these prop scars. Click. So MASK RCNN is a region-based convolutional neural network, and don't ask a question on that because I can't answer it. Hopefully Katie is on and can help out with that, but this is what I know about it. It's an artificial neural network used for object detection, and it's actually a new product for ArcGIS. And Katie happened to be at a Esri users group meeting, and they were talking about this new process, and she was able to work with them to get it, and I believe it's now available for download. And the nice thing about this process is it's highly accurate for segmenting objects. And ultimately, through this process, we were able to identify 23,488 scars. Click. And with those scars, we needed to produce the heat map. And to do that, we converted the scarred lengths into points using the Create Random Points tool, and this ultimately can create this heat map. Click. And this is the final product here. The interim report more or less contains a recipe for doing this analysis. I will say that your computer needs to be of sufficient power to do this work. Katie Lawson, like I said, is a landscape ecologist, has a very powerful computer, and on her computer, I believe it took think it was 17 days of runtime. And I know that when she completed the analysis and this map was first seen, she was very excited because you really can't do anything in the interim with your computer as it's just smoking away. The number of prop scars is more or less 1 scar for every 4 registered boats in Tampa Bay. This data is from that release that FWC had recently that talked about how there are now 1 million registered boats in Florida. And with that, obviously comes more issues. It would have kind of been interesting to do this analysis pre-COVID as well. And I think, you know, a lot of us recognize that during COVID, there was, you know, a lot of interest in boating and angling, in getting out, you know, any way we could. So, and ultimately, if you look at this map here, you can see that the heaviest scarring is towards lower Tampa Bay, the backside of Fort DeSoto, between there and the bridge. Click. I'll go through just a few of these locations. First off, you can begin to see the cells here. The cells are 180 square meters, and the red is upwards of 500 scars, the highest. So red is kind of restricted to just this this area here in this map, so the Fort DeSoto area. And if you're familiar with this area, it's very shallow throughout, but also has, you know, a lot of activity, not just from anglers, but also, you know, a lot of weekend activity, people anchored up along islands of, you know, throughout this area, you know, kind of a party spot, if I might say. And this is the heaviest scarring in Tampa Bay. Click. Next we have Anna Maria Islands extending over to the Terracea area there. Fort DeSoto Memorial. Interesting thing about this area is that, you know, it's pretty high compared to the rest of Tampa Bay, and also the fact that there are a number of public boat ramps in this area. So Bishop's Harbor and some others. Click. Next we have Cockroach Bay, and I'm not sure if you can see it in this view, but Cockroach Bay Roads is kind of in the middle of the image, and you can see both north and south of that boat ramp that the scarring is more heavy than further north or south. So it kind of suggests that there's some relationship to boating activity there. Click. Next spot is the Weedon Island, Ross Island area. Kind of that east side of Ross Island would be the highest. There are some public boat ramps up here, more towards Riviera Bay, but also this area is just crisscrossed with canals, and I imagine, you know, a lot of the boaters have a lift or you know, some other way of getting their boat in the water that doesn't rely on a public boat ramp. This is something that we were kind of thinking about if you're to try to explain why these scars are where they are. It's a bit harder when you have these lifts all over, especially in heavily canaled areas like here or over towards Apollo Beach, because it's, you know, it's more like a non-point source versus a boat ramp, which you can almost, you know, consider to be more of a point source. Click. And for the final products, There are some advantages, but also some disadvantages for this process. One is it's repeatable. If that recipe book is followed, you can do a very similar analysis to what is shown here. And, if that is done every few years, you might be able to get a picture of, how things are changing in the Bay in terms of the prop scars, and probably even infers some boating behavior, boating activities, things like that. Two, readily available software. While this software is actually very expensive, it is readily available. Well-established company. I don't see this going anywhere, despite the fact that there are some tools that can do a similar analysis. People are developing tools in R to do some of this same work. Disadvantages, seagrass coverage was from 2020. Obviously, the updated seagrass coverage was not completed at the time of this analysis, and it sounds like will be available soon. And the issue there was that we visited some sites that should have had seagrass, and we noted, somebody said sorry, but that should have had seagrass and should have had scars within those seagrass beds, and they had neither. So, there's a bit of, if you're going to do those, those site visits, I think they need to be done closer to when, the images were actually taken and some of that work was actually done. So, and two, it's also sensitive to boat wake. So if you look up the northern coast of Pinellas County, you'll see what seems to be some heavy seagrass scarring. Well, there are some scars up that way. Some of that is actually due to boat wakes, and a boat wake, due to the reflective nature of that wake, it looks like a prop scar. It kind of has a segmented shape to it. So that was one disadvantage, but there really weren't that many instances within Tampa Bay, but more common outside the Bay. Click. Next steps are outreach. Marcus, did you have a question?
I can ask it when you're done.
Okay. Next steps were to do outreach, and we've started that with a news release through UF-IFAS Communications, and this led to some interest from Tampa Bay Times and Max, who's an environmental reporter. I think TBAP and some other folks have worked with him in the past. He came out with a photographer, and they produced a couple of articles. There's been some other interest, but we're trying to focus specifically in Tampa Bay, but there has been some other interest. I think boating.com, Soundings Magazine, they're going to do a piece, but whether people in Tampa Bay see something like that is, probably less than, a Tampa Bay Times article. Also some social media work. We're working with Florida Boat or Freedom Boat Club, and what we'll do there is place QR codes at the ramps. We're also working with some of the training materials, and it'll be nice, I think, to work with them, and they seem to really have an interest in doing this kind of work. So We'll be at the St. Petersburg Science Festival in conjunction with FWC and Marine Quest. What's nice about that is there's, hundreds and thousands of people that come by, so should be able to get a lot of people to see these materials. And then finally, billboards and signage. Click. We've developed and also borrowed materials for this process. We've developed some stickers. Here is a draft of that saying "Be Seagrass Safe" as an image of the Skyway Bridge in the background. We're also going to have some imagery for billboards, and this is all produced by IFAS Communications. And what's been nice about this is it's also free of charge. So we've lucked out that way because none of us are graphic designers. Once again, QR codes of Freedom Boat Club ramps. There will be something you can scan, and this will link to the survey and then also the Be Seagrass Safe campaign. So there's an active campaign that was begun by UF and Florida Sea Grant. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. These signs will be put out, I believe, next week, and I'll talk about where those are going to. Click. This is the Be Seagrass Safe campaign. We've been working with Savannah Berry. She's been putting up these signs points further south and then also all the way up to Cedar Key area. So this is a nice product already for us to use. So we didn't have to reinvent the wheel for this. And there's a pledge on here where you can take the pledge to use best boating practices, but also not to damage seagrass. So we'll link to this campaign here. Click. This is the location of those boat ramp signs, and what you'll note is that some are located near the hot spots, like Kingfish and Cockroach Bay and some others, but others are not, and that is because of approvals. It's been a long process to get approval of these signs, and people were worried about clutter. There's, in a lot of locations, you already have sawtooth signs up, and many others, manatees and some others. And yeah, we tried to get Maximo and Fort DeSoto was one we really wanted because it's it's like an Indy car race out there with multiple ramps, and we're still working on that, but it doesn't look likely. Click. And then wrapping up the project, we want to do this outreach first and then submit this survey to the same folks that received the survey previously. And hopefully we've removed all the people that have said F you in an email. And hopefully they've also removed themselves because you can unsubscribe from receiving emails from this. And the focus is ultimately on the CAP, the knowledge, the attitudes, and also practices. And we also have a section for the follow-up survey that talks about the different materials. So we want to know which of the materials we're seeing. Was it signs, or maybe they saw a news article, or what science festival, whatever that was. We want to know what was most effective in the outreach. Click. And ultimately, this was, a large project, a lot of collaborators, and we had a lot of support to get it done. And we couldn't have done a lot of this without support from Sea Grants, support from IFAS Communications. It made it a much more expansive project by leaning on what has kind of been done and then adding our own spin on it with, the hotspots and some other things. And with that, that's all I have.
Great. Thank you very much, Quentin. I kind of have a question right off the bat, not to get too much into the nitty gritty of the GIS analysis, but how did you deal with or take into consideration when you had segmentation of long scars? Because just looking kind of at that image that you put up, you can see one continuous scar, but maybe within the image quality, it gets broken into a bunch of smaller segments, and then obviously that's going to feed into your hotspot analysis later on. Does the software allow you to address that, or how is that handled?
Yeah, so points are placed along that scar. Otherwise, you could have a point representing, a very long scar and then one that's, quite short. So that had to be taken into account, and those points would be along that prop scar.
So then would a long prop scar that's been broken up into 5 pieces, each one of those segments would get its own point eventually, or were those merged back together in like a post-processing or as part of this? I'm not familiar with the machine learning system, so I don't know what it can do.
So there are 2 outputs for this. One is the segments, and that is the first object detection. You're just trying to identify and trace every single one of those prop scars. But in order to turn that into a heat map, we just converted those into the points, which would then represent the length of those. So it's in 2 parts, and which is nice because if we want to do anything with the segments, we can. If we want to do anything with the points, we can. And using the points was just to get those applied to those cells, which ultimately represented those hotspots.
Gotcha. So you would have the ability, if you wanted to do like a weighted hotspot analysis, to look at the intensity as well. You still have that data all present and could put that all together.
Yes. I mean, not me, but somebody. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Marcus?
Yeah, I had a question about, I guess, the accuracy of the results. First of all, I mean, this is a great product for us to have. This has been done in the past. I think Pinellas County has a data set that was manually photo interpreted from the aerial photos. And I think what you've done is a great advancement in terms of, I guess, automating the process and can kind of help us fill in the gaps of different metrics of seagrass condition. So you alluded to, I guess, some issues with boat wakes in terms of creating false positives, that kind of thing. Did you do a true accuracy assessment of the final data product? How many other false positives you got? What were the rates of that? And in particular, how does this product relate to doing this just through manual digitization? So, did you get, is it comparable, or do you get a lot more hits this way that are actual hits or false hits? And the reason I'm asking this is, you mentioned that it takes 17 days to do this on the computer, and it's great that you don't have to do anything during that 17-day period, but is it possible to do this manually in a much shorter period of time and get a much more accurate result? So kind of 2 questions in there, but I'm curious, what is the accuracy of this?
So I've done a very small amount of tracing by hand, and maybe you could find somebody who would be willing to do that. I don't. I mean, it would be so difficult, in my opinion. But it's certainly possible, right?
I could
jump in. I think what you're getting at there is perhaps the eyeballs may be able to better distinguish what is an actual prop scar versus a machine learning process, which, may be possible. I'm not so sure about that, but ultimately with this product, we've jumped the gun a little bit in terms of getting it out there. We don't like to put out an unfinished product to news sources, but we felt like this was part of the outreach activity. And other things are planned for this data set, including publishing it. And what that will require is an estimate of error. You can't talk about this new process that you're using to identify prop scars without having some estimate of error. And unfortunately, we don't also have the estimate of error from actually going out in the field. We really wanted that, but the temporal differences, and maybe that's related to some of our recent changes in seagrass, but that is something we wanted and we're not going to be able to get. So instead, we'll have some error from the images, but have to do that for a publication that will be more or less on the methodology.
I'll offer, Marcus, that these Pinellas County is not the only one to have done this. It's been done periodically over the past several decades. Kelly could tell you how long it took their intern to do it. It was not a short or easy task. And part of the reason it's been done with such, infrequent kind of approach is because of that duration that it takes. But the areas that have showed up, using this, method that's not quite finalized yet is really kind of confirming those areas that have shown up as hotspots throughout like the 30 plus years of the program. And when FWC has been doing this work, there might be some questions about like the intensity and some of like the way that like each individual scar is being marked, but it at least answers the questions of the problem spots are still the problem spots. I think Tom's point in the chat is one. It's maybe one of the problem spots from the past wasn't as bad because of some of the management actions that were put into place, and we could maybe ask questions around that. But if this gets us to a place where we can at least like have a pretty like gross but frequent assessment of this going forward, I think that that's in and of itself pretty useful.
Yeah, and I'm not. Oh, sorry, I'm not. Discounting the value of this approach. I'm always just kind of curious of the relative trade-offs of, manually doing it versus, some sort of more advanced technique. And there's always going to be trade-offs. And I've been in the trenches doing the digitization and it totally sucks. So I understand the need for it. I guess it just depends on what the end value of this really is. Like you're saying, Maya, is it identifying these hotspots and has there been a change over time versus like this really finite assessment of actual prop scars and whether that differs from doing it manually. So I think this is an advancement, and I'm glad it's something that is reproducible and that we can use moving forward.
Marcus, I think what you described would actually be valuable, if you were able to see any differences, or even if there are differences, you can begin to calibrate what you've seen before with what you have going forward. So I think looking at that would actually be useful.
That's what I was just going to offer. I was just going to offer, if you want, we can provide you our data, the aerials that we use, the information we use, the year that we used it from, give you all of our files, and if you wanted to run your model on that same data set.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Digitized, and just as a QC, as one of your QC tools, maybe that would be valuable.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, please.
I think it might also be really interesting to see how well this technique works in our different flux codes. How well does the mapping pick up the scars in our continuous seagrass beds versus our sparse? Because, that could be something, especially from a boater standpoint, it may be really easy to see, that long-standing contiguous bed out in front of you, but some of these new areas of recruitment, they may not be picking up and may be blowing through. And the tools may not be picking that up either because there's not that high contrast in the imagery. So that would be something down the road that might be interesting to look into.
Absolutely. Well, it's the analysis is there, and the layers have been provided. So that is something that is definitely possible.
Yeah. Hey guys. Just and go back to the idea of that automated approach. We did, and Aaron was actually the one leading this effort when he was with the district. But we did a side-by-side comparison of semi-automated mapping for seagrass using eCognition and the more traditional kind of manual photo interpretation, and we found actually really good agreements. I think that is the way forward. So we're all, I think, talking the same language, which is how do you quantify that error. But from what I've seen, I think Quentin, this is a great product, and we have also seen success in a more robust setting in terms of looking at those errors. Where we had the biggest issue is where you started getting into that more sparse seagrass coverage. That's the real kicker. And I think we would have transitioned to a more automated approach by now had things not actually changed in these estuaries where we saw some, we're seeing these losses, and we didn't want to change technology in the middle of these big changes. So kind of delayed that a little bit, but I'm very much on board with what what you presented. I think that is the way forward.
Thank you.
I do think we have to keep the agenda rolling if we're going to end on time, but I appreciate your presentation and your time, guys.
Yes, thank you very much. And what a wonderful segue to our next speaker. So Chris Anastasio is here from SwiftMud to deliver, are we calling them preliminary? Provisional, there we go. Provisional seagrass mapping results. So Chris, take it away.
Aaron. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so I'm just going to echo Quentin's concern too about jumping the gun. We're about 98% of the way there. So the numbers that you're going to see today are pretty much the numbers that are going to be final. But these are provisional because we haven't finished our accuracy assessment yet. So I'm not going to go in too deep with the results. I'm just going to kind of give you an overview. We do have a Seagrass Working Group meeting that is scheduled for February 13th in Sarasota. That's where we're going to really do a deep dive, not only in Tampa Bay, but in all the estuaries that we mapped for 2022. So what I'm going to do right now today is just kind of give you an overview of how we map seagrass. So I think, this is a great segue because I want everybody to understand how we map and some of the limitations that are inherent in these maps. And then I'll show you the provisional results for Tampa Bay. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of, for those of you not familiar with the district seagrass mapping program, we've been doing this since 1988, primarily from Tampa Bay south to Charlotte Harbor. About 2006, we started to include what we call the Springs Coast, which is from Anclote north to Wakasasa Bay, which is near Cedar Key. We map that Springs Coast region every 4 years, and what we call the Sun Coast, which is Clearwater Harbor, St. Joseph Sound, and then south, every 2 years. So this is really a continuous process. While we're getting ready to release the 22 numbers, we're gearing up now for the 24 map, which will be the entire district coast. But today I'm just going to talk about the Tampa Bay specifically. But just so you all are aware, we mapped everything from Clearwater Harbor to Charlotte Harbor. And again, we'll go into this level of much greater detail on the 13th of February. So there's kind of 3 stages to how we do our mapping. We have acquisition, photo interpretation, and field verification. And of course, the acquisition is step 1, which is we base our maps on photographic or digital imagery that are photo interpreted and field verified. This is really important to remember when you look at these results. The flight window for our seagrass maps is December 1st to February 28th. Next year will be the 29th because it's a leap year. But it's important to note this because we call these 22 maps, but they're really the winter of 21-22. And that's important because, as anybody who's worked in these estuaries knows, things change rapidly. And so we are collecting data at sort of the dormant period for seagrass, which is fine. And we do that because this is typically the time when the atmospheric conditions are best, when the clarity is best. And so we take advantage of that by flying in that window. That's important just to keep in the back of your mind, because maybe not so much for Tampa Bay, but definitely for Sarasota Bay, Charlotte Harbor, the numbers that we have represent pre-Hurricane Ian conditions. So that's kind of an important thing to keep in the back of your mind. And we do have very strict go, no-go criteria for flight. We have sun angle criteria, tide, sky conditions, wave height, wind conditions. And all these things have to happen before we give the go criteria for the crew to go up and collect the imagery. So there's a lot that goes into the process. We obviously try to collect the imagery as close to the same time as possible. But as we know, fronts will come through, we'll have wind events, rain events, and all that affects the timing of when we go up and we collect the imagery. Once the images are collected, there's a pretty extensive post-processing procedure that goes into this. As you can imagine, because we're taking pictures of things that are under the water, the imagery that we collect is significantly more complex than what we would collect if we were doing terrestrial mapping. We do have very strict photogrammetric requirements. There are a number of ground control survey points for horizontal accuracy. There's a lot of things that happen with these images. There's color balancing, there's pixel stretching. There's all these things that go into trying to get the best image of the benthic habitat as possible. And then ultimately we create the mosaic that is then used by the photo interpreters. And this all has to be approved by our survey supervisor. Another really important part of our mapping is our field verification, our field data elements. We talked a little bit about that in Quentin's presentation. It is a hugely important aspect to any mapping, is going out and field verifying. We collected over 2,000 points this time from for the Suncoast region. And that's up, just to give you an idea. In 2020, we collected about almost 1,400 points for the entire district coastline. So we really ramped up our field verification points this year because of all the changes that we're seeing in these estuaries. We wanted to get the most accurate map that we could. One of the most important things that we've added starting in 2020, but really in 22, is video and photo, but mostly video. So we have this thing called a quad pod, which has a little GoPro camera on it. And almost every one of those field verification points has a snippet video associated with it. So we can take that and we can take it back in the office and take our time looking at it. So most of these field verification points, the attribution of these points happens in the office, not in the field, which is great because we're not trying to frantically write down information in the field. We're taking our time once the video comes back in, and we have more eyes on that video as opposed to maybe one or two people on a boat. And there's other stuff too that we collect. We collect estimates of attached algae, drift algae, species, and epiphyte load. But primarily the point of all of these field data elements is to get us to the photo interpretation phase. And most of those field points, by the way, are collected at or during the time of flight or shortly thereafter. We try to get everything done within a few months of the collection of the imagery, for the reason that things change. So if you go in the summertime and you look in an area, it could look very different from what it looked like in February or January. So we try to concentrate all the field work within a few months at least of the collection of the imagery. So this is an important aspect too, because when I show you the numbers, and most of you know this, that they're based on a signature on the image. And so when you look at the seagrass acreage numbers, it's based on the signature and verified using the field points. And we use a modified flux mapping convention. So Flux, Florida Land Use Cover Classification System. And so we use this modified flux code. And I'm just going to take you through 3 codes. So when I show you the results, I'm only going to show you the seagrass results, but we do map other elements within these areas that are shallow enough to support seagrass, like oysters and other things. But I just want to show you the three primary codes that really we're most keyed into. The first one is the continuous coverage class, 9116. So again, these are based on photographic signatures. So if you have a uniform signature of greater than 25%, with less than 25% coverage of any unvegetated bottom feature, it would be mapped as continuous seagrass. Patchy is what we use to not only indicate true patches like what you see on the top right, but also just sparse grass. So patchy and sparse can almost be used interchangeably. For those of you who are familiar with our Springs Coast maps, we use a different code, 9111, which is sparse. They're essentially the same code. The only reason we use patchy is because that's what has been used traditionally in the Suncoast region, and people are used to seeing it, so we keep it. But just remember, patchy can be patchy or sparse. And this is an important point because if the grass is so sparse, roughly, less than 10%, we really can't see it from the air. So many times we'll see grass in our field verification data or in others' data like our seagrass or the estuary program seagrass transect data. FWC does a lot of qualitative work for us, and they report stuff like down in Charlotte Harbor. And so we'll have grass present, but if it's less than 10% density, we can't see it. So that's just an inherent limitation of mapping at 9,000 feet. The other code that is of interest, especially in Tampa Bay, is the 9121, which is attached macroalgae, mostly Caulerpa in Tampa Bay. But this is, again, a code that is important because we know that there's a dynamic between seagrass habitat and attached algae habitat. And so we do monitor or track this code, but know that it is not part of the total acreage. So going back to the first two codes I showed you, continuous and patchy, you add those two polygons together, and that's what gives you the acreage of total seagrass. Attached algae is not part of that total, but it is mapped because it's an important element of looking at how these habitat types and ecosystems change. So another important point before I show you the results is we don't map drift algae. So that's just by convention, it drifts. And so because drift algae is so variable, and we only map every 2 years in estuaries like Tampa Bay, we don't want to mislead folks by mapping drift algae. So we annotate it, we monitor it, but we don't actually map it. So you're not going to see that in our seagrass maps, but it is recorded for use. The other thing that's really important, again, just to reiterate, is that we're only looking at the spatial distribution. That's why the work that Quentin is doing and our seagrass transects, these things are really important because we're only mapping the distribution of grass, that signature that you see in those images. We're not mapping species and we're not mapping condition. So this is an example of where all four of these panels would be mapped as patchy seagrass, but you can see different species. And probably the most important one to keep in mind is the bottom left, where you see all this drift algae that's mixed in with the grass. That's still a 9113. So don't think that just because you see a green patch that that's going to look ideal. It could look like any one of these. So that's important too to keep in mind. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and transition into the provisional results. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what was there in 2020. So most of us know between 2018 and 2020, we saw a pretty sharp decline in seagrass beds. The map on the right, again, shows you the 9113. That's that light green color. That's your patchy seagrass. And then the dark green is what we map as continuous seagrass. So those two flux codes together makes up what the numbers are here in the table on the left. And then that sort of purplish color that you see show up pretty much in Old Tampa Bay, that's the 9121, which is the attached algae, mostly in Old Tampa Bay, Caulerpa prolifera, also down here on the southeast corner of the Inner Bay Peninsula along McDill is mostly Caulerpa prolifera. So that's what it looked like in 2020. So 2022, this is the provisional numbers, though I don't expect them to change a whole lot. And unfortunately, we see further decline, not as much decline as we saw between 18 and 20, but still a 12% reduction in grass, about 4,000 acres bay-wide. And I'll show you the next slide will be the change analysis, but I just wanted to toggle back and forth between this map and the 2020. So you can kind of see the change happening. The two that really stand out are Old Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay. So if you look at Hillsborough Bay, you see a lot of the grass that was mapped along the east shore and the Kitchen and up here, most of that has retreated, and that represents a lot of that 428 acre loss. So not much in terms of overall acreage loss in Hillsborough Bay, but a 51% change from 2020 to 2022. And really, when you look at 2016, which is sort of the record high for Tampa Bay, we lost about 80% of the grass in Hillsborough Bay since 2016. We're not as bad as we were in the 1980s, but still a pretty sharp decline over the last 4 to 5 years. And then I'm just going to show you another slide, which is the change analysis. So what we do is we take the polygons from 2020, we compare them to 22, and this is where you see the red is areas of loss, green is areas of gain. And so you can see most of the loss is concentrated in Old Tampa Bay and in Hillsborough Bay, and that's reflected in the numbers over here on the left. Manatee River also saw about a 19% decline, and that's down in this area here, but most of that loss was up in the upper part of the segment. And this is consistent with what we're seeing in places like Peace River, Myakka River down in Charlotte Harbor, where we're seeing a loss in those more freshwater, darker areas, not so much towards the mouth. And then I guess the only potentially good news here is that lower Tampa Bay and Boca Ciega Bay, as is traditionally the case, still saw some decline, but the least amount of it. Boca Ciega Bay with a 1% decline is really not significant at all. So I would say no change in Boca Ciega Bay, maybe minimal change in lower Tampa Bay with about a 3% decline. And as I think Ed pointed out in the chat, for Old Tampa Bay, that does put us at a 30-year low. So we're now lower in seagrass acreage in Old Tampa Bay than we have been since we mapped the seagrass in Tampa Bay in 1988. So again, not good news, but that's about all I wanted to show. It's really more of an update on where we are in the process. Again, much more detail, a lot more information to unpack in these maps, which we will be doing on February 13th. If you're interested in the data that we do have, everything is available online. You can go to our data portal and get all the maps from 1980. Actually, we have maps that go back to 82, but really we start in 88 and then go on from there. And you can get all that data from our open data portal. And again, I always take the opportunity to thank our partners because we cannot do this alone. We have an extensive partnership with so many different entities. This slide is by no means all inclusive. There's a lot more folks that are working on this and helping us create the best maps that we can. This is my contact info. If you have any questions that you think of after the meeting, I'm happy to chat more about this. And that's really all I wanted to kind of present to you today. So it's sort of a little bit of a high-level overview of what's to come. But again, we expect about within the next 3 weeks that we'll have these maps publicly available, not only for Tampa Bay, but for all the Suncoast estuaries. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, so Sheila posted in the chat the Seagrass Working Group meeting on Monday the 13th from 10 to 12. It is a in-person meeting. So, and I don't think Sheila, yeah, and Maya's shaking her head. So we don't have a virtual option. So it's an in-person. Yeah, love for you to join us.
And I think that'll be a good forum to really get into a lot of the discussion, because I know those are always good places where the drivers and the consequences are discussed. But I do appreciate, and we all appreciate, Chris, you giving us an update on the process here. I know we're a little behind our overall schedule, but does anyone have any questions for Chris?
I do have just one comment. My Tara just pointed out my email address is spelled incorrectly. I can't spell my own name. Just use the spelling at the top. Thanks for that, Tara. I just realized that's not how I spell my name. But yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity to give everybody an update. And like I said, if anybody has any further questions, yeah, Maya's point in the chat. Actually, in 1988, Hillsborough Bay had 7 acres of gravel. So come on, not that bad.
Yeah, but Ed's point about Old Tampa Bay is one that ought to be really sobering for everybody. And, I know that there's been hopes that this was a blip, but we've now seen, 3 successive mapping assessments where we are seeing notable losses, especially in our upper bay segment. So I think folks probably got to chew on that. It's probably not surprising. It is disappointing. Obviously, there'll be more work to come. So thanks for giving us that preliminary look.
You bet. Yeah, there's, like I said, there's a lot more analysis happening and there's a lot to unpack here. Just looking at the differences between the patchy and continuous and looking at the trends of those 2 categories and what that means in an ecological context is something that we're looking at right now. And we'll be able to share that on the 13th because there's a lot more information here than just those top line numbers that can give us an indication of what might be happening. So more to come.
Chris, not to be super doom and gloom or to beat a dead sea pony, but post Ian, have you had a chance to go out and see some of these areas? How much of an impact you think that's going to be from this mapping effort?
So we've been coordinating with Mindy and her folks at the Aquatic Preserve down in Charlotte Harbor and Dave Blewett and his folks. They're kind of our eyes and ears. We did, we wanted to get down there and we still want to get down there and take a look and see, but unfortunately, I think it's going to be we'll know once the growing season starts, into the summer, what the impacts might be. And of course, we're all very much watching the red tide situation and crossing our fingers that we don't get a repeat of what happened after Hurricane Irma and almost a 2-year long red tide, which I don't want to get into speculation and talk about any sort of causality here, but we all know that the red tide had a major impact on the grass beds, especially from Sarasota Bay south. And so, that's something we're keeping an eye on. But yeah, it's too soon to tell, I think, what the implications are going to be from Ian.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, thank you very much, Chris. Next up, we have Lizanne Garcia, also from SwiftMud, with our Tampa Bay swim plan update. And it looks like Lizanne's ready to go.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm still testing out all of the functionality buttons on here. So hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Yep, we can see your slides and we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm going to turn off my camera because I'm not sure about some of the messages I've been getting about my functionality on the computer. So just to be on the safe side. Good morning. As Aaron said, I'm Lizanne Garcia. I am the project manager for the Southwest Florida Water Management District swim program, swim plan update for Tampa Bay. I am not doing this in a vacuum or alone. I have a great team at the district with Chris Anastasio and Tara, and we've also got ESA on board, who has with Tom Reese and Doug Robeson numerous years of experience in Tampa Bay. So my point of my presentation today is just to give you an update on where we are. The schedule since we presented to you back in 2021 has been updated a bit, and I'll be talking about that as well as a few other items just to give everybody, make sure everybody's on the same page. I'm sure most folks are aware of the SWIM program. I just want to give a high-level overview of that for any of the new partners that have joined the estuary program. And I'll talk about the SWIM plans. Again, I'm going to touch on partnerships because we cannot be successful as a SWIM program without our partnerships. Then I'll briefly talk about the focus of the Tampa Bay SWIM plan and then talk about the schedule update. So the Surface Water Improvement and Management Act was passed in 1987 by the Florida legislature. The legislature authorizes the water management districts under 373 of Florida statutes. And then more specifically in 1987, due to poor water quality and concern for water bodies throughout the state, the legislature passed the SWIM Act of 1987 and directed the water management districts to protect and restore these priority surface water bodies.
Lizanne, your slides aren't advancing, just so you know.
Oh, sorry about that. Different buttons. So there we are. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
So as I mentioned, the water management districts develop SWIM priority water bodies or lists of priority water bodies, and we maintain that list. It's updated, I believe, every 2 or 5 years. And the original legislation identified Tampa Bay as a priority in our water management district. Once the priority lists are developed, they are plans are developed for the priority water bodies, SWIM plans. And SWIM plans have several elements that most of you all are familiar with because the SWIM plans are similar to the CCMP for the estuary program. Number one, they're not regulatory documents. Number two is that they are focused on water quality protection, natural systems, and hydrologic restoration. We also could include research and monitoring related to seagrass and water quality. As Chris just gave a presentation to you on seagrass mapping, that is one of the district's SWIM initiatives that we've been doing for quite a long time. Our SWIM plans also consider land use land cover that the district collects in helping us to develop issues and drivers. As I mentioned, partnerships are key to the success of the SWIM program. Again, not an all-inclusive slide of the cooperators and partners that we have in the SWIM program. We do have 3 estuary programs within the Southwest Florida Water Management District boundaries, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with them, like Tampa Bay, Charlotte Harbor, and Sarasota Bay. And the partnership with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and its members has been key to the development of this update of the SWIM plan. Early on, as we got ready to start preparing for the SWIM plan update, we met with the Estuary Program staff to look at the CCMP and to ensure that our projects were specific or consistent with the CCMP. Through this program and partnerships, we also developed technical stakeholders groups to help us review and vet analysis of water quality data and some of the other data that we looked at for part of the SWIM plan. The focus of the SWIM plan is it's a district plan, and it focuses on 2 of the 4 core missions of the district. The Water Management District's core missions are water supply, water quality, natural systems, and flood protection. Out of those, water quality and natural systems are the focus of our SWIM plans. As I mentioned, the estuary program has the CCMP, and most of you are familiar with that it identifies actions by the partners to be taken to improve and protect water quality within the bay. What we did was work with the staff at the estuary program to identify the SWIM-led actions and to craft those into what would go into our swim plan. The swim plans also allow us to budget for projects and to coordinate our actions with other district departments. Land management and water supply are two examples where they may be able to implement projects that improve water quality or natural systems, but they're not necessarily identified in the swim plan. This swim plan is relying largely on existing recent analysis. The Tampa Bay Estuary Program Habitat Master Plan update was one of the key pieces of information we used for the natural systems update. The water quality report card and dashboard by the Estuary Program was also a very useful tool, and we are definitely in good position in Tampa Bay to have good water quality data, and that is because of our partners. And then the district seagrass mapping, which Chris talked to you about. And we took all of this information and developed water quality and natural systems technical memos, which were then vetted through the technical advisory committee or the technical working groups that we had established so that we could come up with issues and drivers and management actions for the draft swim plan. So now I'd just like to update you on the status of where we are. The technical stakeholders meetings have been completed. And during about the time those were completed, and Chris mentioned to you the window of data collection for the seagrass update maps. And we felt like it was very important for us to include the most recent seagrass analysis in the plan. And for that reason, we slowed down development of the plan. And that's why you're seeing some of the dates that have changed with the public workshop. As I mentioned, technical stakeholders meetings are completed, but we will continue to coordinate with the Estuary Program and the TAC as we develop the draft plan. Much of if you're familiar with the draft plan, there are statutory requirements related to permits within the watershed and other components that must be included in a plan. So we've worked on those, and we are considering now management actions once we get the seagrass data unpacked, in Chris's words, to include in the plan. The next step for us will be to go to a public workshop that is required by the Florida statutes. It will be advertised, and we will also be sending out an email to the Estuary Program to let them know of the date of the public workshop. Once we are scheduling the public workshop, we intend to have a draft plan on our website, so that link will also be sent so that you can begin review of the draft plan. Once we've held the public workshop, we will present to the Environmental Advisory Committee. That's made up of members of the 3 estuary programs as well as other stakeholders. And once we get comments from that, we'll make any needed changes to the plan and present to our governing board this summer. Governing board approval is required for the final draft of the plan. It's not considered final, though, until we send that to the agencies and local governments for review according to the Florida statutes. During that time, local governments and the agencies will have time to comment on the plan, and the FDEP is our primary reviewer, or not primary reviewer, but will give us comments about the plan's outcomes. And then once we get those comments back, we'll take the final plan to the governing board for its final approval, which we expect in the fall of 2023. So that's really all I have for everyone today. No cool maps. I do have a really cool picture of one of my favorite places in Tampa Bay, and that's the Bower Tract. and I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have.
I think the most important thing is, for these public opportunities for folks to engage and understanding the little bit delayed timeline, but that all this product will be coming out and we'll have our first new swim plan in a few decades. So that's good. Thanks, Lizanne.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions or comments for Lizanne? Well, Lizanne, I know that it's always fun to have a project that's contingent upon 20 other projects going smooth. So thank you for, steering the ship. And it seems like perhaps, knock on wood, that the finish line is in sight. So hopefully everyone can provide feedback as the opportunities come up and we can get this thing wrapped up. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Thanks, Aaron.
All right, so that wraps up our speakers, our presentations for today. If you're following along with your agenda, this brings us down to item 7, our open discussion. The first thing that we have on there is a nomination for co-chair. I am no longer going to fill that role as my career has changed slightly dramatically, and scheduling has become a little more difficult, and I hate to not be able to attend all these meetings. I love them so much and I love being able to be here, but priorities have shifted just a little bit for me. So Maya, I'm assuming you're going to kind of oversee a vote here as the battle plan?
Well, I spoke with several of you to inquire about potential interest in folks serving. So I did want to open up the floor for any volunteers to help Kelly co-chair our TAC. We just really do value the TAC as a vehicle for providing the input from the management community up to our management and policy boards and really helping guiding the technical direction of the program in service of the Bay and the community. So if anybody is interested in volunteering and we need elections, then we can do that. Otherwise, I have one person who's a willing taker, I think. So
fantastic. I will say that Kelly and Maya pretty much do everything. I'm just here to be long-winded during the meetings. So
no. If you're raising hands, I can't see that in this version of the desktop app. So feel free to unmute or just drop anything in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to put Ryan Moyer on the spot. And he's going to make me squirm.
I promise I don't bite, so real easy.
Am I supposed to be saying something?
Yeah, you're supposed to be expressing your willingness to serve.
Hi, everyone. Yes, sure.
Well, thank you, Ryan.
Big shoes to fill.
Just literally.
Ryan's a former scientist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and a former professor at USF. He might have one last semester in him for that, but he's currently employed by Terra Carbon, heading up their blue carbon work. He's been, I think I've really valued his contributions in terms of bringing students into the fold of participating in TAC meetings and becoming familiar with the work of the estuary program and the CCMP. And so I think given all of our recent focus on trying to make sure that we sustain the TAC for the next generation of resource managers, I thought that he provided contributions that were meeting that intent. And so that's why he's one of the folks that I spoke to. So if there's no other volunteers, starting at our March meeting, Ryan will be our new co-chair in place of Aaron. And I just want to say thank you, Aaron, for everything you've done over the past few years as co-chair. You've served excellently and appreciated all of your insights, both at the meeting and at the management and policy boards.
Well, it has been my pleasure, and like I said, I really love these meetings, and I think the great thing about it is that, at least from a personal standpoint, I kind of come away rejuvenated and excited about all the work that is happening in the area after each one of these. And again, I kind of miss the in-person meetings, but seeing our attendance increase, exponentially nearly, as we have gone online, and the amount of participation that we're getting from different sectors and groups that we have not had previously has just been fantastic. So I love the tech, and obviously I'll still be here as much as I can. I just won't feel quite so guilty when I have to send Maya that text message of, hey, sorry. So thank you so much, Ryan.
So there's a few other things in the discussion items that I just want to share with you. I see Carrie's on video. So Carrie, do you want to tell folks about the survey that we have available coming out?
Yeah, sure. So as some of you may know, we're going through an update of our CCMP, and as a part of that, we're going to be reviewing our research and monitoring priorities. And Maya actually went through a presentation on this back in 2021 and talked about, our progress on some of these priorities over the time period. But what we'd like to get from you all is some feedback on the current research and monitoring priorities. And so in order to do that, we put together a survey, and there's a link to it in the agenda. And we're also going to be sending out a follow-up email to folks on the TAC email list, so that everybody has a chance to contribute to that. So it should be relatively easy to go through. We spent a lot of time putting the priorities into groups so that folks can go through and comment on their areas of expertise. And basically what we'd like you to do is go through those priorities and tell us whether you want us to retain them in the current CCMP update, if you want us to revise them, or if we want to retire them. So basically 3 options, and give us some feedback on why you might think that. We've also got some guidance in there that gives you some of the products that we've done over the past several years, so it'll give you an idea of what we've done in those individual priorities, so that it can kind of guide your responses. So that'll be the first step, and then after we go through that survey, we'll summarize those results, and then the next step on that would be to solicit feedback on new research and monitoring priorities. So these are the types of things that are going to guide us over the next several years. So we'd really love your feedback. And that's it.
Carrie,
Thanks.
we're getting feedback that survey hasn't been shared publicly yet. So the link is giving people a permission error. So we'll update that, and y'all should have access to it shortly. Sorry about that.
All right, thank you.
So the next thing is, you already got the little bit of bad news from Chris, but we do, kind of give you a state of the Bay every year, try and summarize what was observed in terms of some of the key indicators that we track for the Bay each year. So Marcus, did you want to share the 2022 water quality results and the 2021 NECTIN results?
Yeah, I'll say a few things. So obviously we at the SRA program release every year different report cards for the various indicators that we care about that tells us how healthy the Bay is. Typically around January, we release the provisional report card for the preceding year. So if you go to the link that's in the agenda there, you can see the provisional 2022 results. And there is a bit of good news, despite the fact that seagrasses are down. all 4 bay segments did quite well last year. So Old Tampa Bay has continued to be the problem in terms of water quality when we look at chlorophyll and light attenuation. But in 2022, it was actually given green. So that's a positive. There's ongoing questions about the links between water quality and seagrasses in that bay segment that we're continuing to look at. Personally, with the green for 2022 in Old Tampa Bay, I kind of take that with a grain of salt. There is variability between years. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to continue to be green, but at least in 2022, we're doing good. The other report card that is released recently is the Nectin Index. That one is a little bit trickier because the fisheries data that we use to feed that takes a little bit longer to process, and we recently got results for 2021. So if you go to the dashboard, you can see those results from I think early 90s to present day. And in 2021, unfortunately, we saw some dips in the numbers for the Nectin Index. And as we all know, that's when we had the fish kills in the bay from the red tide. So that index that we use to report on fisheries health is responsive to things like red tide. We saw previous dips in the past with red tide events, and with 2021 we saw kind of the same. So we're hoping that will bounce back when we get 2022 results, but that is kind of the take home for the fisheries results there. And my dashboards take a long time to load, so please be patient. We're going to try to rectify that, but those are the results.
Okay, thanks for sharing that with everybody, Marcus. We actually have one more quick discussion topic that has, maybe some slides are needed, so I'm going to turn over presenter controls to Tom Reese, but I think it's sort of in response to some of what we've been observing in our estuary related to seagrass loss, but also statewide. So these kind of conversations have clocked around every few years or so. So they're back. And now Tom's going to tell you what he's working on. So here's the controls, Tom.
Thank you, Maya, and I appreciate everybody hanging in there. I can do this, I think, in the last 11 minutes we have left. I was just thinking, Maya, would you just run my PowerPoint? It's only 6 slides. It's probably quicker than me getting set up.
Okay, can you start talking while I get it going then?
Oh, of course, no problem. Hey, I just wanted to say that, the news that we just heard from Chris Anastasio isn't good. And it's not only not good because of what we saw between 20 and 22, but this is a trend, right? And this is a real trend, losing seagrass in Tampa Bay, and it's a concern, right? And we need to start doing other things to address this or be more aggressive, I think. And that's a whole nother topic. But I wanted to say it when this call started, I noted that all 4 of the folks that ran the seagrass mapping program for any length of time were on this call, and that includes myself, Dave Tomasco, Chris Kaufman, and Chris Anastasio. And we know running this that there are limitations to all this. So there's minimum thresholds of less than a quarter acre. Heck, we're mapping in the winter, right? And that was done back in '88, working with Dick Eckenrod, saying, hey, that's our best water quality, our best chance of even seeing the bottom in the bay, but that is the least biomass. So we always understood that these maps are underestimating what the numbers are here, but this trend is not good. And we need to do something different. And then not only is it bad here, it's way worse on the East Coast. Okay, they have some dramatic losses in seagrass, complete collapse of their system. Okay, and that has big ramifications on the organisms that live there. Next slide, please. And we hear the reports of the mortality, and it's staggering. 1,100 manatees in 2021, over 800 in 2022. And you look at there's 7,000 manatees roughly estimated in the state. At this rate, this is not a good thing, right? And so we need to do something to address these seagrass losses. statewide. And so if we can go to the next slide, I did wanted to say that, all those dramatic improvements that we saw through 2012, 14, 16 in Tampa Bay, 100% of that was because of improving water quality. No one was planting any seagrass. Okay, this is the right way to do it. You wanted to get the conditions right and let the grasses come in where they are best suited to, and that's the way we've always approached this. It was never an approach to go plant seagrass because it has its inherent issues, and we'll talk about that in a second. But we are seeing some dramatic changes that need to be addressed. If you can go back one, please. I just wanted to talk about the Indian River Lagoon one more time. And, it's a huge area. Don Dice did some work out there, and he was seeing some grasses recolonize naturally near the inlets because it's with best water quality. But it's a 156-mile long lagoon and it only has 4 inlets, and they're long distances apart. So these are issues. We can't just wait for this naturally to crawl back into these areas and get grass in. There's no seeds, there's no rhizomes. We need to do something. Next slide, please. And so, I wanted to talk about a study because there is concerns about, hey, planting seagrass, how well does that work? Brad was on this call, and there's this paper with Penny and Susan et al. It was one of the largest studies looking back at seagrass projects. A lot of them were seagrass mitigation projects. A number of them were projects I worked on way back when, and they met criteria for regulatory. They were successful a few years. We met our acreages, and so they get released from permitting. But it's good to see that 88% of the grass that made it continued for decades in these locations. The low number in here is a 37% survival rate of the initial planting of grasses. And I think some of that is when you look at the time frame 30 years ago, we were pretty much just experimenting and trying to figure out what works best. And I think planting seagrasses has improved, and that'd be good to see if you looked at the more recent projects, if they had a higher survival rate. But the good news is, even if it's 40, hopefully 50% survive, if you get 88% of that to stay persistently, then I think it's a method to fix this. And knowing all this was going on, Ecosphere Restoration Institute, next slide, went ahead and got sponsorship from both the Senate and the House on a bill to go back to these areas and plant seagrasses. So that was approved. We got notified in August this was approved, and in October we're now under contract to plant 100 acres statewide. Now 100 acres, when you think about 40,000 loss over there and 4,000 loss just in Tampa Bay, is a drop in the bucket. But areas where there is no grass, no rhizomes, no seed, we need to do something. We can't wait for it to just come back in. So we think it's important. I was surprised this made it past the governor's pen, but we did get this funding. And so we are now looking for locations to work in. Now, this is a statewide planting effort, but we're focusing heavily where we need it most, which is the Indian River Lagoon area on the East Coast. But there's problems here in Tampa Bay and in Sarasota Bay, and so we think there's application to put a few acres in those sites. We're also going to work in the Panhandle and in the Keys, but the most of it will be on the East Coast. The problem is we need permits. The Corps, even if you use your hand to put some grass blades in, they consider you need permits, and we do not have time to get 100 individual permits. So we're working with the state and with the feds to see if we can't get some regional permits out there. And so I just wanted to let everybody know we have this funding to plant these grass areas to jumpstart the recolonization of seagrass. And so if anyone out there happen to have a permit to put seagrass in for whatever reason, and there's room, we will look at that and maybe we can jumpstart that. We are working on restoration projects right now, but we're going to be getting permits and hope to be permits in hand by April so we can really start ramping this up. So I wanted people to know this. I'll bring this whole topic up at the Seagrass Working Group, but I wanted the TAC to hear this and to, give me some feedback. We want to know, we have the maps, we know areas where grass were, we know where areas the water quality seems to be back. We're not just ramping this up to go anywhere. We're going to try and do our best to get the grasses in, and so that they can feed manatees, and more importantly, get some rhizomes in there for these grasses to expand. And the last point I'm going to make, we're mostly working with Haliduli. We figure that's the most resilient, the highest range of salinities. And so with that, I'll turn it over to any questions or comments, or at least come and see us at when we present with the Seagrass Working Group, because we'll have more time to talk about this then.
Hey guys, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. So I think this is in excellent hands, because Tom approaches things in a very objective way, and I think I'm looking forward to seeing some of the results. I just want to underscore something that he said that's really important, I think, to the larger group, which especially those who don't work in seagrass, that this is not to imply that what we need to do is spend $500 million to plant grass everywhere. That's not the intent. At least that's not, from our perspective, what we think is the right approach. I think the right approach is the way Tom is doing it, which is we look at areas where we think there's a reasonable chance for growth because the conditions are such that grass should grow, but it's not there. And I know Brad's done a lot of work on looking at some of the sediment cores. If you don't have the below ground rhizomaceous material, then it's going to take longer. So I think, I think it's great that this effort is moving forward, because there is a place for this. But I just want to make sure, that at least from the district's perspective, we view this as one tool in the toolbox. It's not going to fix our problem, but it is definitely a potential to help improve things more quickly than they would have, just through natural recruitment. So just wanted to share that, and I agree. Come to the Seagrass Working Group meeting on the 13th. We'll have time to discuss this a lot more. But good stuff, Tom. Good presentation too.
Tom, just so you know, Mark Schramek has put in the chat that he is suggesting a nationwide permit 27 as your approach.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Mark. That's true. That's what I'd like to get, is a nationwide 27. I know in other parts of the country, they're using regional general permits, but trying to get one of those through takes a long time. So the nationwide 27 makes sense to me. I appreciate that. And I wanted to mention, I didn't say because I was trying to rush through this, is that USF is independently coming behind us and assessing how well this is working. They have a subset of these sites they're going to be doing. And so we're going to get some good feedback from them on it. We're going to use a couple different techniques, and want to see which works best in which water bodies. So FYI.
Hey, Tom, I apologize. I had to go off for another meeting, but are you going to be looking at doing some sites in Sarasota Bay?
Yes, for sure. The areas that we know, like Longshore Bar behind, Longboat Key, we know those areas had great seagrass beds, and they're trying to come back. And if we can jumpstart that, I'd like to work with you to locate this. And I know Brad's doing some stuff, so for getting his feedback, I'd love to put in an acre or two there. Obviously, a couple acres where it makes sense in the Tampa Bay area, and then we'll be mostly on the East Coast.
Okay, we appreciate it, because we're looking forward. We have a lot of shared, questions we want to ask, which is, are these places now suitable? Our water quality is really good, but we want to make sure this is coordinated, because the funding was not coordinated with us, so we want to make sure that at least the project is.
Sure.
There's no other comments or questions for Tom. Just encourage y'all to participate in the Southwest Florida Seagrass Working Group, and probably not the last time you'll hear about this either. I have two quick announcements. The first one is hopefully you all got the notice for the request for proposals for the 2023 Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. We're accepting proposals through March 15th. If you have any project ideas or questions that you want to run by me, please feel free to reach out to me directly. Happy to chat with you and brainstorm some things. And then we also are hosting an open science workshop. The registration is already full, so if you slept on it, bummer for you. Marcus, did you want to say anything about it?
There's actually one seat left. We had a cancellation yesterday, so have at it, I guess. But yeah, Chris A and I are excited to give this workshop. It's going to be February 2nd, right there in the agenda. It's going to be a full day thing. We've done open science workshops in the past, but this is kind of our vision to revive this and sort of teach everybody about some of these best practices that we think can be really valuable for this community in terms of getting the science more reproducible and transparent and out there to the decision makers. So there is a website for the workshop that anybody can access. So if you're not able to attend, definitely check out the website. But if you ask me really, really nicely, I might be able to bump up registration 1 or 2 seats. So, let me know if you really, really want to attend. We can probably make that happen.
Thanks, Marcus. And happy to go ahead.
Sorry, real quick, I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that Carrie said that the survey link and permissions has been addressed.
That's all the business that I have. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 22nd, so put it on your calendar. If anyone else has anything they want to share, feel free. Now's the time. Otherwise, we can adjourn.
Thanks, guys. Good
All
luck,
right.
Aaron.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks,
See you guys.
everybody.
Thanks.